Welcome to the battlefield, to the boardroom. You are here for a 10-minute tough guy talk on tactics. I'm with Paul Peng, a friend of mine and an Army veteran who runs a company called Sentri. And Paul does a lot of things related to shooting. So both teaching people concealed carry, but also, and more specifically now, working on active shooters, which I think actually is something we should be talking about a lot more because companies have an obligation to look at their space. And individuals ought to know what they ought to do when they hear a sound go off, besides pretend like it was someone's tire blowing out or a muffler backfiring. And so, Paul, how do we get over sort of the cognitive dissonance that comes from not wanting it to be bad, and so pretending like it's something that it's not, or the natural instinct when you hear a banging noise in a movie theater? Not that anyone goes to them anymore, but I've heard that the number one thing people do is ignore it or dismiss it and try and make excuses as to what it is instead of actively responding to the situation. So, Paul, thanks for joining us. And
thank you. Thank you, Gerard. So, it's really interesting. You brought up the idea of people going to the movie theater, and if they hear something go bang, they usually ignore it. Well, as you know, when most people when they sense fear or something is not normal, they have one of three reactions, right? Most people only think fight or flight. What most people don't realize is that the most common response is often freeze. They literally freeze in place. And you combine that with what we call, some of the psychologists calls an optimism bias. It's actually a coined term where the optimism bias is defined as the thinking and thought pattern of an individual that essentially has the, it will never happen to me mentality. So I'll give you a perfect example. There are plenty of evidence in the Vegas shooting back in 2017, in the Mandalay Bay shooting, where people were literally dying around them. I mean, there was this video of this couple that was standing behind these two speakers, and they were cussing at each other. They're two friends. They're just yelling back and forth at each other, while the camera was being, was pointed towards the field where people were literally dropping. You could see people drop as the cracks were going on, and one of them swore up and down that it was a helicopter. As people were being shot in front of him, one of them swore up and down it was a helicopter. Now, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, but that's a pretty deep level of bias there. Like, if you see something with your own eyes and you're still denying it, because, as a nation, the United States is not what it was today as it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. I mean, if you count up all the mass shootings between 1980 and 1999, you're talking 10. Right? You're almost 20 years, you have 10. You start with 2000 to 2018, the FBI says that there's 277. Gun Violence Archive, that number jumps up to the thousands. But the point is that during a lockdown year in 2020, the number of mass shootings, according to the Gun Violence Archive, where four or more people are injured, fatally or not, shot specifically, fatally or not, actually outpaced 2019. So while we were locked down, there were more active killings in 2020 than in a non-lockdown year. Now you couple that with a record number of first-time gun owners. I think the last statistic I saw, it ended in July of 2020, and it already outpaced the average yearly gun sales by 4.6 million. And this is an actual statistic, that stopped in July. And I know that number kept going up, going into August, September, and then all the violence and all that crap that happened during the election season, it fueled it even more. You couple that with limited ammunition. So what
do we do with that then? Like, that's, you're not going to change the state of the world, right? But say I'm a business owner and I've got 10, 50, 100 employees. I've got, a loading dock or a tech center, or, I'm running a construction company. I've got my office staff, I've got people coming in and out of the buildings. Like, what does that mean to the average business owner or leader? Should they be all engaging private security and surrounding every work site and screening people as they come through the doors? I mean, what's the smart way to approach this then?
Well, so one of the first things that a lot of companies do is, what do? They install security cameras, right? because it's a deterrent. Well, the technical definition of a security camera, all it is an investigative tool. It doesn't actually stop anything. It just records the people as they're, breaking the law. So it's an investigative tool. And if you have nobody watching that investigative tool, then what good is it? So what the other thing that as a business owner you should be aware of is that the OSHA Act of 1970 actually requires all businesses across the United States. It is a federal OSHA law that requires all businesses to train their employees and train their employees in order to prevent hazards from happening in the workplace. Now, when you talk about the OSHA Act of 1970, most people think about two things. They think about sexual harassment and they think about workplace violence, right? Those are two of the most common things that people think about. And most companies do that, okay? What they don't talk about a lot is active shooter. And the reason they don't is because it's required by federal law, but it's not required by state law. It's a mention. Assembly Bill 1598, California statute passed in, I think it's 2012, I believe, mandated active shooter training for all first responders and police officers. It's a mandate. You have to have it, okay? But it's suggested for private businesses, but it was not mandated. But the interesting thing that I want people to understand is that out of all documented incidents, according to the FBI's own database, where 3 or more are dead, almost half, 44% of all active shooters happen in businesses. But yet they're not mandated by law to have it. But almost half of all the deaths happen in office spaces.
Yeah, but if you're a good organization, right, and you're looking at ways you can take care of your people, and you recognize that our world is evolving and changing, and gun violence is on a rise, so whether it's mandated or not is less relevant, right? I mean, these companies could be doing something now rather than waiting, for politicians to kind of create a law. A company could go out and find the training. So what kind of training do they need? Like, what should they be paying attention to? Like, not everyone is going to become, special forces, and we don't want office spaces where everyone comes to work carrying unless you're in a place where, that's what you do. Right.
Right.
So what does the average, tech company do to prep themselves or to protect themselves or to, does awareness alone good enough? I mean, what do you recommend for people who are looking to level their game up and take care of people, regardless of what the law says?
So part of what I teach is called the ALIVE active shooter course. So it's ALIVE stands for assess, leave, impede, violence, expose, right? Those are the 5 key terms of the ALIVE program. And the whole objective is to help the employee properly react during one of those situations, in an active shooter situation. Instead of freeze, it gets you to think, right? I mean, what's the one thing that we always hear in the military, right? Whenever you train and train and train, you train like you fight like you train, right? When things go to hell and everything is around you is just going wrong, you revert back to the basics, you revert back to training. That's why we train. That's the whole purpose behind it. If you don't train anybody how to at least react to an active shooter, then you're probably not going to do well. And what's sad is that a lot of hospitals and a lot of, for example, like big companies, I'm not going to name names, their version of active shooter that they give it is they have their employees sit in a room and watch a video. I'm sorry, but that doesn't really do anything.
You got to run rehearsals. You have to people need experiential, tactile things. They have to touch it to understand it. And you're right. The phrase in the military we always use in the Marine Corps anyway, was you don't rise to the expectations. You default to the level of your training. So if the level of your training is watching a movie, well, wait for the hero to come in and you'll be fine, because that's what happens in the movies. Like somebody shows up who doesn't have shoes on, yippee-ki-yay, and,
Right.
But if you want to engage, yes, you do have to create actual physical training. You got to let people get over the uncomfortableness of going through the motions so that in the moment they're not uncomfortable place. And unfortunately, hey, we're on 10 minutes, but if you want more, like this is a tease, and maybe Paul, we'll have you back on and we'll do another one. We'll kind of dig into actual steps. I like ALIVE. We'll put that up in the comments. Reach out to Paul, connect to him on LinkedIn if you haven't already. Thanks for taking 10 minutes to talk to us, but the biggest takeaway I think from this for the battlefield of the boardroom is be aware of your environment. Don't lie to yourself and hope that it's something that it's not. Don't sit and wait. Like actively participate in looking around, see what's around you. Right. And that's the first and easiest thing you can do to detect danger is be aware. You don't have to be neurotic, but you can be aware. When things are out of place, they stand out. You just got to look for them. And then sign up for one of Paul's classes. So hate to cut you short, but good chatting.
Thank you,
Battlefield of the boardroom. We'll talk to you soon, Paul. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.